Welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. Years ago, I began recording the bedtime stories I told my children every night. Now, we would like to share those stories with you. I hope you enjoy my Stories for Wonderful Children. Once upon a time, there was a porcupine named Rhonda. Rhonda the porcupine. Rhonda was for the most part a pretty happy porcupine. She lived in a nice dry hole in the ground, underneath the outstretched roots of a maple tree. The maple tree was near a stream, so Rhonda always had plenty to drink, and she was very rarely hungry. Rhonda did, however, have a problem. And that was this, that Rhonda loved more than anything else to play with balloons. And if you are a porcupine and covered with sharp quills and thorns, playing with balloons is a very difficult thing to do. It's not easy to get a balloon in the first place if you're a porcupine that lives under the roots of a maple tree. Rhonda frequently had to go out looking, wandering through fields, wandering up close to the city to find balloons that little boys or girls had dropped or that had floated away and then come down to land. But when she did eventually get one, she would carry it home to her den and she would gently use her paw to sort of pop it up into the air, and she would sometimes be able to pop it 2 or 3 times before the inevitable happened. The balloon would come down, it would hit the tip of one of her quills, and it would pow, pop. This made Rhonda somewhat sad. She entertained for a while the idea of having all of her quills cut off so that she could play with the balloon. But then, when she told her plan to her friend Frida, who is also a porcupine, said, "Rhonda, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life." She said, we need our quills for when things try to eat us. And this woods is full of things that might try to eat us. Cats, dogs, rarely a wolf. Once, just once of all the time I've lived here, I saw a mountain lion. And several times I've seen a bobcat. Just don't think it's worth it. And Rhonda thought about it for some time, and while she was thinking about it, one day when she was walking through the woods, a coyote came running up and was going to try to eat her, but she curled up into a tight little ball so that all her quills and spines were poking out, and after Coyote had tried a couple times to get a hold of her, and for his troubles had only achieved getting a hold of having a couple of quills in his tender snout. After that happened, Rhonda decided that maybe it wasn't such a bad thing to have quills, even if they did pop balloons. Well, one day, Rhonda had a bit of an adventure. She was standing out in the middle of a field, and she was mostly just standing there minding her own business. Rhonda was in the clearing, and she noticed that there were children all around the edges of the clearing, and the children ran into the middle, and they covered her in a big net, and they captured her and took her back to their school. They weren't going to keep her for very long. She didn't know that at first, and she was scared that she was never going to see her warm, snug hole under the maple tree again. But the teacher showed them all about the different parts of a porcupine and talked about what beautiful quills she had, and then all the children left to go home for the day. After all the children had left, Rhonda decided that it was time to speak up for herself because she did not want to stay in the elementary school classroom forever. So she said, "Excuse me." And the teacher looked up and looked around, shook her head, and then went back to her work. And Rhonda said, "Excuse me, could I talk to you for a minute?" And the teacher looked up and looked around and looked at Rhonda and said, "Did you talk?" And Rhonda said, "Yes. Do you mind if I talk to you for a second?" The teacher said, "Porcupines can talk?" I don't remember that being in my notes. Well, I don't know if all porcupines can talk, but I certainly can, and I'd really like to ask you to let me go. I have things I have to work on. And the teacher said, well, I'm very sorry. If I had known, I would not have troubled you. And Rhonda said, oh, that's okay. I need to go back to hunting for balloons anyway. You wouldn't happen to know where there are any balloons around here, do you? The teacher said, well, She said, isn't it sort of hard for a porcupine to play with a balloon? And Rhonda sighed and said, yeah, but I still like to do it. And the teacher said, oh. She said, you know, my husband works in a balloon factory. Why don't we go have a talk with him? And she let Rhonda out of the cage. And she and Rhonda walked downstairs together. Rhonda sat in the front seat of the lady's car and tried very hard not to let her quills poke into the seats. They arrived then at a big factory, and they walked up the steps of the factory, and then they walked into the factory, and they walked past lots of different things. They eventually stopped at a man who was standing in front of a big machine, and the teacher said, hello, and she gave him a big hug, and he said, well, hello, to what do I owe the honor of this surprise? And the teacher said, well, I have this porcupine who loves balloons. And the guy said, right. And she said, no, I'm serious. We captured her to come to the classroom, and now I'm going to let her go, but to thank her for her efforts, I wanted to see if you could make her a balloon that she wouldn't pop. And the guy said, right. How do you know she likes balloons? Well, she told me. Porcupines don't talk. And Rhonda said, well, excuse me, but I do. And the man said, what? Oh, my goodness. And she said, is it possible to make a balloon that won't pop when it hits my quills? And the man said, oh, yeah, that's no problem. Here, we'll just mix a little more Kevlar into the balloon. And then it ought to be tough as nails. And he turned some dials and flipped some switches and pressed a button, and the machine kind of hummed for a minute. And then it clicked. A little door opened on the side, and a balloon came out. Now, it wasn't a very fancy balloon. It was just sort of a dull yellow color. But when the man blew it up and tied it and tossed it to Rhonda, she patted it up in the air. And as it came down, she saw that it sort of got blown a little to the side, and she thought, oh no, it's going to hit my quills. And it did. It came down and it hit right onto her quills, and it bounced off. And it did not pop. And Rhonda said, oh, thank you so much. And she took her balloon back to her comfy hole under the maple tree. She played with it every day, and for all I know, she is playing with it still.
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's story, but questions and witty commentary were supplied by my children. The music was created by Brandon Thompson. If you enjoy the show, please tell someone about it or leave a review on your podcast provider. Our website is storiesforwonderfulchildren.com, and you can also find us on most social media. I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.